Good evening. Welcome to the Fright Files. My name is Chris Harmon, but everyone calls me Dr. Fright. Tonight, we are going to venture to three of my most favorite frightful stories of all. You will hear tales of a whispering dollhouse, as well as two other stories that bring fright through your bones. Before we begin, I need everybody to ask themselves one very important question. Can you survive all three stories to the end? Let's begin as we take a tale to our first frightful story of the evening. I call this story The Whispering Dollhouse because when this story was told to me originally, I could not believe my ears. You see, the manor at the edge of town was a place of whispers and shadows, a grand old house whose best days had long since passed. Its walls, once vibrant with color, were now faded and peeling. The tapestry hanging limp with dust, the windows streaked with grime, let in only the silvers of light, casting the once grand rooms into a perpetual twilight. The villagers spoke of the manor in hushed tones, passing on stories of its former grandeur, and the tragic fate of the family that had once called its home. But the truth of what lay within the manor was a secret known only to the walls that had witnessed it all. Eliza was a curious girl, 12 years old, bright eyes that missed nothing, and a mind that was always seeking out the hidden and the mysterious. When her family moved into the manor, she saw it not as a piece of decay, but a world of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Her parents, busy with their own lives, paid little attention to the manor. Many rooms leaving Eliza to explore, its dusty corridors and forgotten chambers of her leisure. In one of these solitary explorations that Eliza found the attic. It was one of these solitary explorations that Eliza found the attic. The entrance was hidden behind a door at the end of the narrow, winding staircase, nearly invisible beneath layers of dust and cobwebs. The decay creaked anomalously as she pushed it open, revealing a space that had clearly been untouched for decades. The air was thick with secrets of old wood and forgotten memories. And the only light came from a single grimy window that had cast long shadows across the floor. The attic was cluttered with old trunks and forgotten treasures, but what caught Eliza's eye immediately was the dollhouse. It sat on a small table in the center of the room, covered in thick layer of dust. Its once bright painted folded and chipped. You see, the doll house was large, detailed with tiny rooms, furnished with delicate miniature furniture. Inside, the tiny figures of dolls stood frozen in place, their lifelike faces, early expressions as though they had been caught mid-movement. Elijah felt a shiver run down her spine as she approached the dollhouse, her curiosity battling with a sense of unease. The dolls were unsettling in their stillness, their glassy eyes staring back ahead. But there was something about the dollhouse that drew her in, something that made her reach out and brush the dust from its roof. Now you see, as her fingers touched the wood, she felt a faint vibration, almost like a heartbeat, pulsing through the dollhouse. Startled, she pulled her hands back, but the sensation lingered, tingling in her fingertips. You see, the attic seemed to grow colder, the shadows lengthening as though they were alive, creeping closer to the dollhouse. Now, despite the chill, Elijah felt an inexplicable urge to open the dollhouse to see what lay within. Then she lifted the roof with trembling hands, revealing the rooms inside. Each one was meticulously detailed, from the tiny lace curtains to the miniature books and the shelves. The dolls were positioned throughout the house, some sitting at a dining table, others standing in the hallways. As Eliza peered closer, she noticed that each doll's face was frozen in expression of her fear of sorrow, their tiny hands raised as though in defense, supplication. A whisper so faint she could barely hear it brushed against her ear. Help us! Free us! Help us! Elijah jumped, looking around the attic, but she was alone. The whispers come again, this time cleaner, more instant. Free us! Help! We're trapped! She stared at the dollhouse, her heart pounding. The whispers seemed to be coming from the dolls, their voices soft and pleading. Elijah shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought as her imagination, but the whispers grew louder, filling her mind with their desperate pleas. Over the next few days, Elijah found herself returning to the attic again and again and again, drawn to the dollhouse, desperate despite the unease. Despite the unease it stirred in her. She spent hours arranging in the rooms, moving the dolls from place to place, trying to make sense of the whispers that filled her mind. Each time she touched the dolls, the whispers grew clearer, more desperate. They're lying to you, one voice whispered. They're lying to you. They're lying. They want to trap you too. Another voice, soft and sorrow, begged, please help us. We're so cold. Now, the more Eliza listened, the more the dollhouse seemed to change. The rooms, once pristine, are orderly become dark and twisted, the furniture broken and scattered, the walls stained with shadows that seemed to shift and move, their faces twisted in agony as they reached out to her. And then, one night, one night, unable to sleep, Eliza crept back to the attic, the dollhouse calling to her with a pull she could no longer resist. And as she opened the dollhouse, she noticed something very different. The dolls were moving. Now, at first, it was hard to imagine. A hand twitching, a heart turning slightly, a head rotating. But soon the movement became more pronounced. The dolls acting out scenes with their tiny rooms. Now to her, it was horror. Eliza realized the screams were reflections of her own life, dark and twisted versions of events that had happened over the years, or that were yet to happen. She watched as a doll dressed in a tiny version of her own nightgown stood at a miniature window, peering out into the darkness. Another doll, resembling her mother, lay in tiny bed, her face contorted in pain, as shadowy figures loomed over her. The whispers became frantic, overlapping in voices that filled the attic. Break it, break it, break it, destroy it, destroy the dollhouse. It's too late. Destroy it right now. She's here. Do it, I say. Eliza backed away from the dollhouse, her heart racing. She knew that the dollhouse was cursed. She knew it was cursed, a prison for the souls of the manor's previous inhabitants, each one forced to relive their darkest moments over and over and over again. The dolls were not just figures, they were trapped souls of the dead, and the dollhouse was feeding on them, growing stronger with each passing day. Desperate to escape, Eliza grabbed a heavy book from one of the attic's dusty shelves and swung it at the dollhouse. The impact sent the tiny figures flying, but the dollhouse itself remained intact. The whispers turned to screams, the dolls writhing in their tiny rooms, their movement frantic and terrified. Eliza struck the dollhouse again and again and again and again and again, but it was as though an invisible force was protecting it, keeping it whole. The attic seems to close in around her, the walls darkening, the shadows growing deeper and more oppressive. The whispers reached a fever pitch, a chorus of despair and fury that echoed in her mind. Suddenly, the dollhouse emitted a bright light, a blinding light, and Eliza was thrown backwards, crashing into the attic wall. She lay dazed, her vision swimming as the light engulfed the room. She tried to crawl away, but her limbs felt heavy, as though they were no longer her own. Through the light, she saw the dolls rising from the dollhouse, their tiny forms growing larger, more human-like, and they stepped out of the dollhouse, their faces twisted into the grotesque masks of pain and hatred. The largest of them, a doll with Eliza's own face, reached out to her, its glassy eyes reflecting the terror in her own in her own. No, Eliza screamed. but it was too late. The dolls grabbed her, pulling her towards the dollhouse, its grip cold and unyielding. The light grew brighter, swallowing her whole, until there was nothing but the blinding, suffocating light. When the light finally faded, the attic was silenced once more. The dollhouse stood on its table, untouched, pristine, as though nothing had happened. The tiny rooms were once again perfectly arranged, the furniture in place, the dolls standing motionless in their positions. The next morning, the housekeeper climbed up the stairs to the attic, her steps slow and weary. She pushed open the door and gasped at what she saw. There, in the center of the dollhouse, was a brand new doll, a tiny figure with Eliza's face, her expression frozen in an eternal scream of terror. The housekeeper backed away, her heart pounding. She had heard the stories of the cursed dollhouse, but she never believed them, and that is until now. With trembling hands, she closed the attic door and locked it tight, praying that whatever darkness lay within the dollhouse would stay trapped forever. But deep inside the dollhouse, the new doll stood among the others, her tiny hands pressed against the glass walls of her prison. And in the silence of the attic, the faintest of whispers could still be heard, a soft, desperate plea that would go unanswered for all time. You have just heard the whispers of the dollhouse. Two more frightful stories to go, folks. And this next story gets even more frightful, more terrifying, because this next story is called The Harvest Man. Pay very close attention to this next story, because what you're about to hear may come across as a complete shock. You see, I, Dr. Fright, did not believe what I heard when I first read this story. But then I come to realize that the reason this story is so odd could be the same reason this photo is upside down. Because this story has no ending to it. You'll see what I mean as we go along. In the heart of a sprawling countryside, where fields of golden wheat stretch endlessly towards the horizon, there's a small village with a haunting tradition. You see, each year, as the harvest season approaches, the villagers whisper about the harvest man, a scarecrow like figure said to come alive when the moon is full and the crops are ripe. The harvestman is believed to be the guardian of the fields, ensuring that crops flourish and the village thrives. With his protection comes a dark price. It is said the harvestman demands a sacrifice to guarantee a bountiful harvest, a life to be taken and buried in the soil. A strong-willed and practical girl, had grown up hearing tales of the harvest man. Like most of the villagers' youth, she dismissed the stories as being nothing more than superstition, meant to scare children into the obedience. Her family, like many others, relied on the fields for their livelihood. And as the harvest season neared, Riley found herself working late into the evening, her hands sore from hours spending pulling the weeds and harvesting the crops. Then one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Riley lingered into the fields, lost in her thoughts. The air was cool and crisp, the first hint of autumn in the breeze, and as she worked, she noticed a strange movement out of the corner of her eye. A tall, shadowy figure standing at the edge of the field. Squinting against the dim light, Riley saw what appeared to be a scarecrow. Its ragged clothing fluttering in the wind, its head a burlap sack with crude features stitched onto its surface. At first, Riley thought nothing of it, just another scarecrow placed to deter the birds. But as she continued to work, she couldn't help shake that feeling that the figure was watching her. Every time she glanced up, the scarecrow seemed to have shifted slightly, its head tilted in her direction, as if observing her every move. The thought sent a chill down her spine, but she shook it off, telling herself it was just her imagination playing tricks. As the night fell, the fields grew eerily quiet. The sounds of day, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of crickets were replaced by an unsettling stillness, and Riley was about to call it a night and head home when she heard it. A faint rhythmic tapping, like the sounds of something sharp striking the earth. She paused, her heart pounding in her chest, staring her to the tapping grew louder, closer, accompanied by the rustle of something moving through the crops. Glancing up, Riley breath caught in her throat. The scarecrow, the harvest man, was no longer at the edge of the field. It was much closer now. Its tall, spindly front illuminated by the pole light of the moon. The figure was more defined, its body seemingly made of twisted vines and hay, with long skeletal arms that dangled on its sides. Its burlap head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and from within the stitched eyes glowed an eerie, unnatural light. Yes, panic surged through Riley as the harvest man began to move, its long limbs carrying it towards her with slow, deliberate steps. She turned and ran, the tall stalks of wheat whipping against her legs, and as she fled, the harvest man was relentless, its strides unnaturally long, closing the distance between him and her. With terrifying speed, Riley's heart pounced in her ears, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she raced towards the village. But just as she thought she might escape, she felt something cold and rough crawl around her ankle. The harvestman's arm. It could even be colder than that. Had stretched out, vines twisting around her legs like a snake. Riley screamed, thrashing and kicking in despair, attempting to free herself, but the harvestman's grip on her legs was unyielding. It dragged her backwards, pulling her towards the edge of the field where the earth had been freshly turned. A gaping pit waiting for its next occupant. As Riley struggled, the harvestman leaned over her, its grotesque face hovering inches from hers. When it spoke, its voice was loud, gaspy, whispered, like the rustling of dry leaves in the wind. A sacrifice must be made. A sacrifice must be made. The field demanded. The fields demanded the earth must be fed. Riley's mind raced her thoughts, a blur of terror and disbelief. She clawed at the ground, trying to find purpose, but the harvestman's strength was overwhelming. With a final words, desperate to cry, she tried to plead with the figure, to reason with it, but its words were swallowed by the darkness. The harvestman's eyes glowed brighter as it dragged her into the pit, its bony hands shoveling earth over the struggling form. The soil was cold, the heavy pressing down on her, filling her mouth and nose, cutting off her air. You see, the last thing Riley saw before the darkness claimed her was the harvestman standing tall above her, its burlap sack, head turned towards the village as it making its next victim. The next morning, the villagers awake to feel the fields, to find the fields lush and full, the crops more abundant than ever before. But Riley was nowhere to be found. Her family searched the fields, calling her name, Riley, 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 Riley. But there was no trace of her. In the center of the fields, the harvestman stood its form, as still as silent as it had always been, its head tilted slightly, if in silent vigil. The villagers knew what had happened, though no one dared to even speak a freaking word about it. You see, the harvestman had claimed this sacrifice, and the village would prosper for another year. But they also knew that time would come again when the fields grew barren, and the harvestman would rise up once more, demanding another life to feed. And so the cycle continues, year after year, the harvestman standing watch over the fields, waiting patiently for its next victim, waiting patiently for the next harvest. You see, these tales are so frightful. And now we move to our next frightful tale. A tale so frightful, so scary. I hope you can survive. I call this tale The Elevator from Hell. The Elevator from Hell is our final tale here tonight. If you can survive this final terrifying story, then you are a true fan of the Fright Files. You see, there was a family who certainly were not hurting for money. Well, it was their 8-year-old son's birthday, and so they decided to take him for shopping in the city. It was a very busy day as usual. Well, when the boy had all of his gifts, they were going to go down to the subway to get across the city. The family went on their train to get across the subway. They got off the train and headed for the elevators. When the doors opened, there were many people there already. They were all adults who were faintly big fellows. The boys darted into the elevator, leaving behind its parents. The parents tried to get in the elevator, but it was too late. The elevator's doors closed and was heading right on up. The parents rode on the elevator the same time the boy went up. When the doors opened, they thought they would meet their son. Well, they didn't see him anywhere in the crowd. In fact, they didn't even see him get on or off the elevator. So the parents looked all over through the crowds, but not in any way find their son. They quickly called the cops, and they arrived very quickly as well. A detective found a button on this and showed it to the boy's parents. They recognized it. A detective was sent on the case. First thing to do was to check the elevator. The detective found a button and showed it to the boy's parents. They argued that it was their son's button from his shirt. Next thing was a detective watch all the security cameras recordings. He obviously went to watch the elevator. He wanted to see the camera's recordings from it. He saw the big man and all the other people who surrounded him. He also saw the boy enter the elevator. After that, he couldn't see much because a person got in front of the camera. He watched the camera that showed everyone filling out the elevator, but there was no sign of the boy, leaving the elevator still a mystery. He thought he knew the big boarded man, but no sign of the boy leaving the elevator. He thought he knew the big bearded man in the elevator with the boy from somewhere. He did some research and found out who this man was. He was a man who went on an expedition to Antarctica. The lost communication had to survive. They lost communication, but they just had to survive. Many of his friends had also died, and they eventually ran short of food, so they had to eat his friends to live. The other people in the elevator were also survivors in the man's group. They also reported to cannibalism to live. They detected decent to meet with man. He easily found his address. He lived in the city, so it was not too hard to find him. The detective had an interview with the man. So were you on the elevator on the day of November 12th? The detective asked. Yes, I was, said the bearded man. Did you happen to see a little boy in the elevator riding up with you? Yes, I did. He was alone. I'm surprised his parents weren't with him. Yes, well, did you ever see him leave the elevator by chance? I didn't think so. I was one of the first people out. There was a pretty big crowd, okay? Because because the little boy has turned up missing and he reported not coming out of the elevator. Yes, well, that is quite, and as I wish I could help you, but I don't see him love anymore. I don't, I didn't see him leave myself. Well, thank you for your time. I'll do anything to help. Ah, and by the way, check out my book I wrote from when me and my crew had to survive in Antarctica. I think it isn't too bad of a book that I wrote. I'll be sure to do that. Thanks. The detective left and went to the library to pick up the man's book. The detective read the book in the next few days. The book was about how hard it is and was to live. But many of his best friends died on that trip, and how were like his brothers, and they were like his brothers. But the only way to live was to eat corpse from his dead friends. It was a horrible feeling, he said, but he would do anything to have the sweet taste of life. After reading the book that afternoon, he resolved and replayed all of the footage in the elevator. He studied the man and all of his friends, but something just didn't feel right about this. You see, he watched all of them walk out, but still not the boy. He also saw a ball in the other man's hand. All of them were wearing backpacks from some odd reason. That is when it clicked. If the big man and all of his crew were still cannibals, they probably didn't like the fact that eating someone. They probably didn't like the fact of eating someone at first to live. But what if they got used to it and eventually started to enjoy it? He studied the camera footage one last time and thought how much that could look like a leg or an arm, or how that could ball look like a foot. Sadly, he couldn't really see it. It was or wasn't, and could not get enough evidence. But what he thought was crazy is how there was not one drop of blood in the elevator. Not one drop of blood. You have just heard the tale of the elevator. I want to thank all the fans in the chat who was here today to sit through all of these stories. And yes, my friends, if you have made it through all 3 tales here tonight, then you are a fan of Dr. Fright. We have some wonderful questions in the chat. Wanting to know if this story was made up or is it true. As I like to say, these stories have not been proven truthful, but they have not been proven fiction either. However, those who write these stories and tell me of these horrifying tales assure me that these tales are the most frightful tales to tell. And until next time, this is Dr. Fright saying, can you survive the next episode? Can you survive Tales from Dr. Fright? And be sure to check our show this coming Friday, as we will have a special guest on our show. He will be showing us some artifacts and items he has found related to E.T. His name is Sean, and he may have a frightful tale to tell. Until next Friday, until this coming Friday, I must go back to my rest. Dr. Fright says, good night.
My God.